why should my student apply for financial aid, or as the student, why should I apply? You really don't know what you qualify for until you actually do apply. The reason for that being the FAFSA or the DREAM Act takes all the information that you plug in and puts it into a 40-page calculation. So that 40-page calculation would take somebody by hand about 3 days to do. So it's easier for you to really apply for the application so we can give you a better idea of what you might qualify for. We do have help available to help you complete your FAFSA or your DREAM Act on our virtual front counter. So on our main Saddleback financial aid page, we do have a link to our virtual counter during our business hours. Unfortunately, we do not have after hours assistance at this time due to the coronavirus and our reduction of staff. But we are there during the day, Monday through Friday, for assistance if you need some help. You can also apply for financial aid even after the semester starts. A lot of students don't know that. It doesn't take very long to apply, usually about 30 to 40 minutes maximum, and it's free. You should never have to pay to fill out an application. So this is a really big thing. There's 2 different applications for 2 different types of people. So the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and that's for US citizens and eligible non-citizens. So an eligible non-citizen would be a permanent resident, somebody who has a green card, asylum, or a certificate of naturalization. Those students can fill out a FAFSA application. The DREAM Act application is an application for students who may be undocumented, that have lived in the state of California for a year and 1 day and are graduating from a California high school. So those 2 applications are the ones that you would want to fill out. Depending upon your citizenship status, you would fill out only one or the other of those, depending on the citizenship status. So the purpose of these is to calculate your financial aid eligibility, obviously to figure out what we can award you. And for the FAFSA, it's a universal application to be considered for financial aid. And so what I mean by that is the FAFSA allows for you to add up to 10 schools in the United States, any 10 schools you want. You would put those on that application, and just by sending that one application, all 10 schools would get that. If you're looking to apply for more than 10 schools, you would have to, unfortunately with the FAFSA, you would have to make a correction and take one off to add another. So it's up to 10. The DREAM Act application, you can apply to any school within the state of California. So you can add up to 10 schools in the state that you are looking to apply to for the DREAM Act. So these are what the websites look like. The one here is the FAFSA. The one over here is for the DREAM Act. It's important to note that you want to make sure to go to the .gov websites. The .coms and the .orgs tend to be scam sites. They'll sometimes ask you for money to complete your FAFSA or your DREAM Act, which you shouldn't do because both of these applications are free to apply to. Or they can also have basically identity theft situations. So it's important to make sure that you're going to the .gov website so you don't end up in one of those situations. So there's 2 main requirements to qualify for aid. The first is to determine the student's unmet need. So they take the cost of attendance at the school, and that's going to vary from school to school. So the community colleges are obviously going to be a little bit less than, say, the UC school. So that is something to take into consideration when you're looking at different schools. And then they would subtract your expected family contribution. So the expected family contribution is generated after you submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act. And that number, the EFC number, will be located in the lower right-hand corner of your confirmation page for your FAFSA or your DREAM Act. So that's where you'd find that number. And after that calculation, that would equal the remaining student need and potentially what we can award the student based on financial aid purposes. So the second requirement would be to maintain a minimum cumulative GPA of a 2.0 and complete 67% of all units you attempt. So this isn't a Saddleback standard. This is a national standard. So the minimum 2.0 and the 67% applies to all colleges in the United States. So other eligibility criteria, so your financial need will be determined upon your AFC number, which we talked about in the last slide. Students do have to complete their high school diploma, GED, or the equivalent to receive federal funding. You have to enroll as a regular student working towards some type of degree, certificate, or transfer program, so essentially not going to school for fun. And of course, maintain those satisfactory academic progress standards. So that is that minimum 2.0 and the 67% completion rate. And sometimes other schools may have a specific criteria that you have to follow with them to meet their standards. For federal aid, you do have to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. DREAM Act students at this time do not qualify for federal aid, only for state aid. And for both the FAFSA and the DREAM Act, gentlemen have to register for the selective service if they're in between the years of 18 and 25. That's not only a FAFSA DREAM Act requirement, it's a actual federal law. So students have to apply for, gentlemen have to apply for that between their 18th and 25th birthday. So federal aid. So federal aid on this slide is all the aid we're going to talk about from the federal government that is free, meaning you don't have to pay it back. So the federal Pell Grant, they're awarded to undergraduate students. So once you have your bachelor's, you can't get these anymore. But for incoming freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So the amount changes yearly. So this year, for example, this year we're currently in right now, the maximum is up to $6,345 for the year. So that went up actually about $250 from last year, which is pretty cool. The amount you get of that money will be based upon your financial need, the cost of attendance of the school, your status as a full-time or part-time student, so how many units you take is going to affect the amount of aid that you can receive, and your plans to attend school for a full academic year or less. So obviously we can't pay you a full year's amount for one semester. And it's very important with the federal Pell Grant that you cannot receive Pell Grant at more than one school at a time. So you have, if you're going to be attending 2 different schools at the same time, it's going to be beneficial to choose the school where you're going to be taking a majority of your classes to get your financial aid award package. So the FSEOG is a program that is administered by the school. So not all schools participate in this program. It's basically a supplemental grant on top of the federal Pell Grant that can assist your student in purchasing additional supplies such as books, things like that. Not all students can get this. It is awarded on a first come, first served basis on most schools' campuses. But it's usually at the community college level, at least, it's between $200 and $800 a semester. So that will vary from school to school. Federal work study is an on-campus job opportunity where you can work up to $2,000 a semester. It is taxed. So a lot of students ask me, is it taxable? Yes, it is. But it is not only a great way to earn a little bit of extra federal money, but also a great learning opportunity for resume building. I, for example, was a campus tour guide at Cal State Fullerton my freshman year through my junior year. And it was an amazing opportunity to work on my public speaking skills, to get to know a really good group of people on campus, just to hang out with and have fun with. And it was a great entry into the college lifestyle, or working at a college. It was pretty neat. This year, right now, due to COVID, that program has been suspended until we get the all clear, at least at Saddleback, to go back on campus. I know some other schools are currently open. Their campus is open to students, but right now at Saddleback College, that's suspended until we open the college after the whole COVID crisis. So the federal loan program is the only type of aid I'm going to talk about tonight that would need to be repaid after the student graduates. So this, both loans this year have a 2.75% interest rate. However, the interest rates can change yearly. So that's for this current year, the 2020 to 2021. Your students are going to want to do the 21-22 FAFSA. So that's really important. The 21-22 FAFSA or 2021-2022 FAFSA is going to be for next year when your student would actually be attending the college. So these interest rates and the Pell Grant amounts, those might change for next year. Hopefully the Pell Grant goes up and the interest rate goes down. That's always my hope, but we'll see what happens. But for this year, both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan have a 2.75% interest rate. The student must be enrolled in a minimum of 6 units per semester and maintain a minimum 2.0 GPA. The student doesn't have to have a credit score to apply for these loans, but there is a major difference between the two loans. The subsidized loan does pay your interest while you're in school. The unsubsidized loan does not. So you start paying interest on the unsubsidized loan right away. So the subsidized loan is up to $3,500 for the year for a freshman, and the unsubsidized loan is up to $6,000 for the year. So my warning with loans is if you don't need them, don't take them. If you do need them, take only what you need and start with the subsidized loan. That's the one that's not going to charge you interest while you're in school and give you a better opportunity where you're not going to be accruing interest as you're learning and be able to pay that off a little easier when you graduate. So Cal Grant, so we're moving into the state portion. So both Dream Act students and FAFSA students can qualify for the California student aid. So I had a lot of questions last night at a different school thinking this was only for Dream Act students, but no, this is for both FAFSA and Dream Act students. So the Cal Grant is kind of like the state's version of the federal Pell Grant. At the community college level, it's usually about $1,600 a year, and this does stack with your federal aid. However, the Cal Grant is time sensitive. So the 2021-2022 FAFSA opened up October 1st. They want you to complete your FAFSA or your Dream Act. Actually, both of them, the FAFSA and Dream Act, opened October 1st. They want you to complete one or the other of those applications prior to March 2nd of 2021 to qualify for Cal Grant. So if you miss that deadline, you miss out on Cal Grant for the entire year. However, you can still submit your FAFSA or your Dream Act after that date, you just won't get the Cal Grant. So I'm making that clear. You can still submit your FAFSA or your Dream Act after March 2nd. You're just not going to qualify for the California grants. So on top of the Cal Grant, there's also the Student Success Completion Grant. That's a grant that's available to students who are full-time. You have, for a student who is enrolled between 12 and 14 units, would get an additional $649 a semester. A student who is enrolled in 15 or more units would be able to receive an additional $1,500 a semester. So that is a big, big deal. The California Promise Grant, this is not to be confused with the Saddleback Promise Program. That's a little bit different. If you're looking for information on the Saddleback Promise Program, we do have that link to that on our actual website at saddleback.edu. And then when you log in, you'll go to Student Success and click on the Promise Program. So that's different. The Saddleback Promise Program is different than the California Promise Grant. So what the California Promise Grant is, it waives your tuition costs up to $46 per unit if you're a California resident, meaning you've lived in the state for at least a year and a day, and you have to meet a certain income threshold that changes again yearly. But if you've qualified for it, to maintain it, you have to maintain a minimum 2.0 GPA, just like the federal standards, and complete at least 50% of your coursework at the college. So again, I don't think I mentioned this, the California Promise Grant is only available at the California community colleges. So it doesn't follow you to the four-year universities, unfortunately. So that's definitely helpful. It basically makes tuition free for any student. The Saddleback Promise program has the opportunity to give your student free college overall, meaning you know, books, supplies, materials, parking permits, pretty much everything would be covered under that. But since I'm not an expert on that, I would recommend you go to our website and check out all the information there. The Chafee grant is for students who were in California foster care between your 16th and 18th birthday, but have not yet reached your 22nd birthday by July 1st, 2020. Not only does this require you to do a FAFSA or a DREAM Act, you do also have to do the California Chafee Grant Program application. So for the DREAM Act, I always like to let students know that the information on your DREAM Act is not going to go to any other governmental agency aside from the Department of Education. That's a myth. So a lot of students think, oh, I shouldn't sign up for that because my information is going to get, you know, shared or whatever with the other governmental agencies. That's not true. It only goes to the Department of Education. So it's not going to go anywhere beyond that. It is important to make sure you're going to the .gov website, like I said before. And that March 2nd priority deadline is going to be very, very important for Dreamers, because if you miss that priority deadline, you're missing out on half your aid, which is that Cal Grant and the Student Success Completion Grant. Also, for the DREAM Act, you do not have to have a DACA status to qualify. You can still apply even if you don't have that. So dependent versus independent. So this is a big one I get asked all the time. So basically, let me break it down in the easiest way possible. If your student answers no to all these questions, they are considered a dependent student, meaning they have to include their information and your tax information on their FAFSA or DREAM Act. The only exceptions to that would be if there is abuse, neglect, police reports, things like that, and that would be a dependency override form. We won't take into, the federal government doesn't take your student as an independent student if they are supporting themselves, living on their own, paying for their own expenses. If they answer no to all these questions, they're still your dependent and you still have to list your tax information. If your student answers yes to one or more of these questions, then they're considered independent and only would have to put in their tax information. So I just touched a minute on the dependency override. So if you have a student that you know, or maybe you are the student that is in one of those unique situations where you don't have contact with your parents due to you know, violence, things like that, you can definitely fill out a FAFSA with just your, or DREAM Act with your information. And then once we get your FAFSA or DREAM Act in our office, you can contact, and this is at any school, by the way, you can contact that school and ask them for a dependency override. And they'll be able to look into your circumstances and see if they can change your status from dependent to independent. So that's going to be a big, big deal. So applying for financial aid, so if you haven't already done this, the first step is only for the FAFSA students. It's to create your FSA ID, which we'll explain in a moment. The second step would be obviously to fill out your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application. And the third step would be to follow up with the school you're planning on attending. So the FSA ID for FAFSA students, again, DREAM Act students, this does not apply to you. The FSA ID is going to serve as your personal login and signature to the FAFSA application. You do have to have a social security number, your full legal name that appears on your birth certificate. So please don't put your like a nickname or anything like that, because that could cause problems creating the FSA ID. And your date of birth. Another thing I've been noticing this year is a lot of students have been putting today's date as their date of birth. Just please make sure to double check all your information when you're creating your FSA ID, including the social security number, because I've seen it before where somebody accidentally hits a 9 instead of 6 or something like that. Double check all the information before you hit submit, because the school cannot help you change this. You would have to contact the Department of Education to help you do this, and it can take a long time. So definitely something to keep in mind. Also too, if you are if you're a student who is a dependent, one of your parents would also have to create an FSA ID to sign the FAFSA or at the end. So I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. I apologize. If you're a parent that has an older student that you've already done a FAFSA for in the past and have an FSA ID from that, or you personally filled out a FAFSA, you can use that FSA ID as yours. But both the student and the parent have to use a separate email to create individual IDs for themselves. So there has to be 2 different IDs, one for the student, one for the parent. If your parent cannot create an FSA ID because maybe they are undocumented or there's some other circumstances, like my dad, he just refuses to learn anything technology, you can print a physical signature page and sign it, date it. Your parent would sign it, date it, and you'd send it to the PO box at the bottom of the page. So that's going to be an easy way for you to be able to have your parent sign it without creating that FSA ID, but it does take a bit longer. So after you submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act at any school, it's never, ever gonna be the final step. There's usually additional documentation that the Department of Education has us collect from you to verify your account. So at Saddleback, we will notify you via your Saddleback student email, not your personal email, your Saddleback student email, which you will get once you register to be a student. And we'll ask you to log into our portal, which is the saddleback.verifymyfafsa.com. So until we have your FAFSA or DREAM Act, you won't be able to log in there. And that's the same. I know it says verify my FAFSA, but that's going to be the same login area for the DREAM Act students and the FAFSA students. So any additional documents will kind of pull up kind of like this here. This is our example. And there'll be a little red box with a yellow drop down arrow that you'd click on, and it would have the form there for you to turn in. The documents, once you submit them all to us, can take 6 to 8 weeks to process. So it's very important to get this process done early before the semester starts. So we usually start bringing in the 21-22 FAFSAs. We're going to start bringing those in after March 2nd and begin working on those files right away. So it's important to get this done early so that by next August, we're ready to get you going with the financial aid award package. At the bigger schools, the 4-year schools, sometimes it can take up to 14 weeks to get this documentation done. So that's why it's so, so important to get this done early. Also for DREAM Act students, if you're looking to come to Saddleback, for the login for the saddleback.verifymyfafsa.com portal, when you create your DREAM Act, you're going to get a DREAM Act ID. You're going to want to write that down somewhere and keep it safe, because you're going to use that as your social security number to log into this portal. It's going to be very, very important to keep a note of that, the DREAM Act ID. So scholarships, yay, everybody loves scholarships. This is the fun part of the presentation. So I'm not sure, you might want to check, the first place to check as a graduating senior, this is a big, big deal. You would want to check with your advisors at your current high school. So check with your counselors, advisors, check and see if you have a scholarship page on your high school's website, because there's a lot of scholarships that go unclaimed every year for graduating high school seniors, and a lot of those are given to the school to promote and they'll know a little bit more about that. Also check in with your employer and your parents' employer and see if they have any scholarship opportunities that you may want, that you can apply for. So an example that I had, my dad's an LA County fireman. So when I was going to college for my freshman year, he showed me a scholarship that I could fill out for being his dependent and being a full-time student. I got $1,000 just because I was a dependent of him, which is a pretty big deal, which is really, really cool. Also, to check in with the major department. So like if you're looking at a specific major and you know what you want to major in, check in with that department on your college's campus, because sometimes they have scholarships that the financial aid office may not know about. So another example of that, a personal example, I was a sociology major at Cal State Fullerton. I went into their office once, asked if they had scholarships. They gave me an application. I was the only student to apply. So you just never know. I was the one that got a scholarship that was meant for 2 people. I got it all to myself, which was really nice, and paid for that whole semester for me, which was really cool. So it's definitely a good idea to look into different options. Be wary of scholarship scams. So this is a big deal as well. They should never need your social security number to give you a scholarship, and you should never be paying to get free money. So I know that sounds funny, but sometimes they'll ask you for an entry fee or something like that. So just be careful. If you see something like that, just be aware that you shouldn't have to be doing that. On this page here is a list of recommended scholarship search engines. So basically they're like the Google of scholarships. These go year round, so you can apply all year long, continuously. I personally used FastWeb throughout my educational career. That was one of the ones I used, but I have heard good things about the others. The great thing about these different scholarship search engines is that they're not all academic based scholarships. So for example, I got one from FastWeb for having brown eyes. I took a picture of my eyes. I wrote a 1-paragraph essay about why it was important for me to go to school, and I won $600. I've heard of some for the most unique duct tape prom dress, for testing a video game for 2 days, for, you know, sports, other hobbies. So there's a lot of different scholarship opportunities out there. It's just a matter of taking the time and researching scholarships throughout the year. So this is kind of like having a second part-time job sometimes for students, but it is worth it in the end, because you may end up with a lot of additional money, and some of that may even follow you, say from the community college to your 4-year university, or sometimes even into your master's program. So this is a great way to earn a little bit of extra money that you can't necessarily get from the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. So because we're getting limited on time here, I know I'm a little over the presentation part. The important thing is to apply early, apply prior to March 2nd. Definitely visit our financial aid office if you have any questions, and we'll be there to help you with that. We do have help filing your FAFSA or your DREAM Act. You can get help with that on our virtual counter, which is on our Saddleback financial aid website. Financial literacy, that's another resource that you may want to look into. It's a great place to kind of learn about budgeting, saving, and spending. It's a free resource. I really like this site because it kind of put me to shame on my coffee habit. It showed me that I was spending over $2,000 a year on coffee, going to Starbucks 5 days a week. Very scary. So I ended up turning that around the next year and paying off my car loan. Instead of buying coffee, I paid off my car, which is even better. So it's kind of a cool way to kind of research budgeting, saving, spending, and learning more about the differences between credit and debit cards, things like that. So important dates. So we talked about the March 2nd priority deadline. Again, you can apply after that date if you don't apply before then. And then for the private scholarships, they have separate deadlines. The Saddleback scholarships, you may see those on our website. Those are for continuing students, so they won't be for new students. Your student would be able to apply for those after being at Saddleback for at least a year. So that's something to keep in mind. And finally, this is my contact information. That's my email. So if you have a personal question you want to ask, you can feel free to email me here. I do right now, due to the fact that I'm doing quite a few of these virtual presentations during the day and at night, it can take me 24 to 48 hours to respond. So if you need a more immediate response, I don't know if I could put this in the chat, but yeah, I don't know how to put this in the Q&A, but you may want to write down another email where you can get a hold of our office, and they can get a response to you within 24 hours, except of course the weekends. And that is SC, so S is in Sam, C is in Charlie, Fin, F-I-N, A-I-D, so scfinaid at saddleback.edu. So that one you can get more of an instantaneous response within 24 hours, as opposed to me, it can be up to 48. So with that, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. So
thanks, guys. Caitlin, we have some really, really great questions in the Q&A that I would love for you to discuss.
okay.
I don't mind reading them off for you, and then you can just give your best answer.
Okay, that'd be awesome.
So we have a question that says, you know, do your expected family contribution, does that calculation change based on different colleges and their tuition price? Or is it just a set standard that's calculated by your FAFSA or your DREAM Act?
It's a set standard. So
Okay.
the FAFSA or the DREAM Act is going to get you one EFC number.
And I'll clarify also for our parents who are on the line that your EFC calculation is not necessarily what you will always pay for tuition. It's just a calculation from the U.S. Department of Education that says this is the estimated amount, or this is the financial strength that we think that your family has. I think that some families see their EFC number and think, that's not accurate, or I don't have that. And it's just a calculation. It's just a starting point. And it's what wonderful people like Caitlin and financial aid offices and specialists will use to start the process of figuring out what other types of aid that you might qualify for.
And also on top of that, a lot of schools, so like for example, the 21-22 FAFSA is going to use your 2019 taxes. So I know for a lot of people, their situations have changed, and every school has something like we do. We call ours the family contribution appeal. And that's going to, you still have to submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act with 2019's tax info. But once we get your FAFSA in, you can apply for that family contribution appeal and say, hey, 2019's taxes don't currently show my current financial situation.
Sure.
Can you please take into consideration 2020's tax info?
And I think that that is probably going to be a really common thing this year due to COVID and several businesses and people being unemployed. I think that that's a really common thing for our families to know that will be happening across colleges and universities, that it's definitely an okay thing to ask for some of those recalculations if you think that your EFC based on your previous tax information is not a true reflection of your current financial status in your family. Awesome. Okay, Caitlin, can you clarify for us, can you qualify for both the California Promise Grant and the Saddleback Promise Grant, or are they the same things?
So they're not the same thing. That's a big, big deal. Okay. The California Promise Grant is available to anyone. So that, as long as you're a California resident, meaning you've lived in the state for a year and a day, the Saddleback Promise program is only available to incoming high school freshmen that meet a certain threshold. Right now, there isn't an income cap, though the rules have changed a bit. I've missed a couple meetings on it over the last couple of weeks because I've been doing these. So there are rules and regulations that go along with it and timeframes you have to meet to be a part of the Saddleback Promise program. Mm-hmm. But the California Promise Grant doesn't have any necessary deadline. Okay. Hopefully that kind of covers it.
It did. I'm trying to type some, so I apologize if you guys hear my little types in between. Our next question is, if you financially qualify to pay for your tuition at any institution, is it still worth looking for scholarships or worth applying for financial aid?
I would say yes. So scholarships, I mean, at the time when I applied for scholarships when I was an incoming freshman, my mom had lost her job. My dad temporarily lost his at the fire station that he was at. So our income dropped. So when I initially filled out my FAFSA, we were making a pretty high income between my two parents. When they both lost their job, we had a reduction. And so when I applied originally, I didn't qualify for any financial aid. So I actually applied to a ton of scholarships, which I was lucky, and I got about $4,000 or $5,000 in just scholarships, just from taking the time. I mean, it was seriously like 20 hours a week I was spending, but I knew my family couldn't expend the resources to help me go to college because I had a younger sister right behind me in high school they had to support. So it is worth your time, I would say, to apply for scholarships. And some scholarships do require you to have a FAFSA or a DREAM Act already submitted to qualify for their scholarship. So it is worth your time, I would say, because, you know, there's a lot of opportunities out there that aren't going to be based on your income.
Awesome. Okay, the next few questions actually have to do with verification, which I know is a process that lots of students go through. You touched on it briefly in your presentation, Caitlin, but can you explain what verification is and what extra documents typically students will get an email or get flagged to provide in addition to their FAFSA or their DREAM Act?
So 50% of all students who submit a FAFSA or DREAM Act are selected for verification. This is a way to prevent fraud in the state and federal, basically to prevent people from taking money that aren't actually going to college. So that's the best way I can explain it, or using it for nefarious purposes. So sometimes students will get asked the majority of students will get asked for clarification of your household size. So how many people are in your household, how many of those people are going to college, etc. Sometimes they'll ask to verify the tax information you put on the FAFSA. Yes, we do know that you turned it in on your FAFSA, but we still have to collect some type of documentation to show that you did file taxes that year. So I know that sounds like a hassle, but that's something you could even get started on now. You can go to the irs.gov website and request what's called an IRS tax return transcript for 2019, and they'll send that to you in the mail. The reason I recommend doing it now, I know this sounds like it's a million light years away, but if you get it now, because it has been taking a long time due to the coronavirus and the U.S. Postal Service situation, it has been taking up to 6 to 8 weeks for students to just get that form. So I would say if you have the time to just go on there and request it by mail, you'll get it in the mail within the next 6 to 8 weeks and have it at the ready in case you need that to turn that into the schools that you're applying to. So that's a pro tip I give to a lot of students to get it done ahead of time. That's also really going to help you because if you're interested in the Saddleback Promise program, that's a lot of where people get tripped up is on those tax documents. So if you don't have those to turn in for verification, you're going to get left behind. So that's a big deal to get ready for that and be able to have that available. Other ones that we see quite frequently are if your student doesn't register for the selective service, they're going to be asked to provide proof of selective service. Again, that's only for gentlemen. But if you say, oh no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to skip that question, that's going to come back to bite you later on because you're going to have to turn in extra documentation to show that you've done that. There is a button on the FAFSA and the DREAM Act that will ask you, are you registered? And if you say no, it's going to ask you, do you want us to register you? And you can click yes, and that's going to satisfy that requirement. It takes you just a few seconds, as opposed to having to turn in the additional documents can take several weeks, if not months, to get reviewed and get your file finished.
Awesome. The next question that we have, Caitlin, which is a really common question that we see often is, if your parents are divorced, whose tax information do you use?
Okay, so you would use the parent that you live with 50% or more of the time, regardless as to whether you are claimed on their taxes or not. So if you live with mom 50% or more of the time, it is just mom's information, unless mom or dad that you live with is remarried. If they are remarried and you live with them more than 50%, both your parent and your step parent's information is going to be required on the FAFSA.
Awesome. And then can you just clarify one more time for us, Caitlin, what is the form or the process for a family or for parents if they want to ask for a manual recalculation based on updated tax information?
So the name is going to vary from school to school. We call it a family contribution appeal. I know other schools call it a, gosh, what did we used to call it? Ours is called a family contribution appeal or an income contribution appeal. Basically, if you're asking, you can always ask them, like, I need an income adjustment. The school will know what you're talking about, and they can kind of direct you to the correct resource.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know previously there were some financial ceilings for the California Promise, or previously the BOG waiver grant. Are there any more of those ceilings, or is it an open program that is open for everyone?
For the California Promise Grant, there are income ceilings. They do change from year to year. So for the 21-22, obviously I have no idea. Those usually get released like mid-July of every year. You can always Google search it, go onto the California Student Aid Commission's website, and they should have those income thresholds available on there, or CCC Apply is another resource that you can go to kind of see the income thresholds and how they are, at least for this year. Next year, though, you'd have to review them because they will change.
I think that's an important distinction that we should definitely share with families, that your EFC calculation or your eligibility for certain grants or loan programs can change from year to year as there are changes within the U.S. Department of Ed. So I have lots of families who will come for an appointment with us and ask, how can we estimate or calculate maybe what our EFC will look like to know what we would qualify for? And it is not a very straightforward answer because it changes every single year. So that is something just for our families to know. A few more questions about just the application itself, Caitlin. So
sure.
As a part of verification, are you ever required to turn in bank statements or things from your banking institution?
No.
Awesome.
Just your tax returns.
Cool. And then if back to our question previously about whose tax information is most pertinent to fill out the FAFSA or DREAM Act, if a student lives with both parents 50-50, then how do they make that determination of what tax information to use?
You use one or the other. If it's 50-50, you get to choose.
Awesome. All right. And then we have some specific information about the direct retrieval tool. Melissa, I think it would be best if you email Caitlin directly about some of those, because I think that she'll be able to kind of walk you through line by line. If there are no other open questions, I want to say thank you to Caitlin so much for the super informative presentation. For our families that are still on the line with us, I know that this was a lot more informational and not as interactive in the actual application itself. That is coming up in December. So if you want to get started on your FAFSA or DREAM Act, absolutely we recommend that you guys start that as soon as you feel that you're ready. If you start and you need some more support or want some additional support, we're going to have the folks from the California Student Aid Commission come and do a virtual presentation just like this, one in English and Spanish, where actually we're going to be able to send you into breakout rooms to talk about your own specific financial information and personal information because it is private to you. That is going to be on our website now, I think, to register for. So if that is something that sounds like it would be really helpful for you, please feel free to join us for that in the first week or so of December. But thank you, Caitlin, for all of this awesome information. I know that there were really awesome details that I think sometimes I even forget about. So it's great to have a refresher too every single year because things change. As we kind of move on, we are going to end our presentation tonight because we have a few more sessions. If you guys would like, we are actually going to have a little QR code that you can